Good morning, dear passengers. This is Dr. Quinta speaking, and I'll be your captain for today. Thank you for choosing to fly Sankofa. Our destination today is Zimbabwe, and our expected flying time is 16 hours, departing from Washington, D.C. Hold on to your seatbelts. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yes, I know you guys are surprised and maybe wondering now how I was able to change my voice that much, right? Well, I didn't. We do have a special pilot today who you will get to know better as we land in Zimbabwe. But now, please keep your mask on and enjoy your flight.
African History Daily by my daddy.
We just landed in Hare in Zimbabwe and now driving to our destination. Dr. Quinta, can we take this opportunity to hear more about you?
Hello, I am Dr. Quinta. I'm an African traveler and adventurer. I hail from Nigeria, travel to all 7 continents and about 60 countries around the world, with 21 of them being in Africa. My favorite experiences include climbing to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, bungee jumping in South Africa, and hang gliding in Rio de Janeiro. In addition to traveling, I enjoy learning about history, especially African history. I regularly promote African culture and provide opportunities for other Africans to do the same. I recently published a collection of African fables titled The Hare and Baboon and Other Stories. And I also published a book called From Antarctica to Zimbabwe, How I Hit the Reset Button on My Life. Both of these books are available on Amazon or on squintybooks.com. Finally, last but not least, I hold a PhD not in flying Sankofas, but in chemical engineering from Georgia Tech University and a bachelor's in chemical engineering from Penn State University.
I don't remember having done an episode on the history of African engineering yet. So where or how did you find out about this podcast?
Well, I have been developing a writing competition for African writers. And so I was Googling around looking for podcasts that are focused on, African culture, African history. And I was so excited when I found yours because I love the bite-sized content that you put out. And I love, obviously, the material that you put out. So I reached out. That's how I found you.
You are flying us today toward a historical site in Zimbabwe. Which site is it and why did you choose this site among all the 21 African countries you visited?
Yeah, I have to say there are so many great sites around Africa that I think are worth visiting. But Great Zimbabwe is one of those sites that I've been learning about since I was a child. So I went to school, primary school and secondary school in Zambia. And my teachers taught me about Great Zimbabwe. So I've always been looking forward to seeing it in person. Great Zimbabwe is a site in Zimbabwe that gave the country its name. It means House of Stone. I chose the site not only because of the connection I have from, being a child, learning about the amazing history behind it, but also because as I travel around the world, there are so many other sites that are talked about so much, and we don't talk enough about the one in our own backyard, even as Africans. So I thought that I would take this opportunity to talk about Great Zimbabwe and make sure that everybody in the world knows about it.
Did you get a secret statistic that the whole world is listening to my podcast, including Idris Elba and Michelle Obama?
Of course.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message because I believe we're all in this together.
We just arrived to Great Zimbabwe. Whoa, this is really amazing view from this spot. So, Dr. Quinta, what can you tell us about this site and what did you feel the first time you came here?
Wow, I don't even know where to start. There's so many things I can say about Great Zimbabwe. First of all, what is it? It's a massive stone city that existed mostly between the 11th and 15th centuries, but started being occupied around the 5th century AD. It was the capital of a kingdom in Zimbabwe called the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, built by the Shona people, and is one of actually hundreds of stone sites that are found around Southern Africa, but it's the biggest among all of those sites, which is what makes it special. One of the things that makes Great Zimbabwe unusual is that it was built with stone, but the stones were not connected using mortar. It was also very busy when it was occupied. Inhabitants traded with people. They provided gold and ivory in exchange for other goods, and they traded with people as far away as the Swahili coast, but also as far away as China. So this was like an international thriving trade that was going on. One of the cool things about Great Zimbabwe, it was built using the naturally existing huge boulders in the area as camouflage. So from a distance, you see those stones and you don't really recognize that the stone walls are separate from it. So they use that camouflage as a defense against enemies. They also designed their passageways, especially where the king was living, to be so narrow that only one person could go in at a time, so that attacking armies would easily be defeated because they could only attack one at a time. So being at the site, I mean, there were so many things that went through my mind, right? First of all, it was just huge, amazing, just feelings of awe, but also a lot of feeling of pride, knowing that these were my ancestors. Yeah, I'm not from Zimbabwe, but I'm African, so I'm claiming them as my ancestors as well. So knowing that my ancestors were, able to build such a thriving megacity that obviously impacted the whole world, because if they were trading with the whole world, then they had an impact on the whole world. I mean, I felt so proud. I felt a little bit of anger because what I learned when I was there was that there were Europeans who, as usual, were claiming that there was no way Africans had built this place. But only a little bit, because I didn't want to give them too much energy. And then finally, I felt a little bit of, disappointment. It was really difficult for me to get to Great Zimbabwe. There weren't too many tours. Actually, I couldn't find any tours that were going there. So I had to be creative. That was a few years ago. So I'm hoping that things have improved now. But I really just hope that Zimbabweans start to make it easier for other Africans to get to the site. I spent about 3 hours, going through the site. Like, that's how big it was and that's how much there was to learn about it. When I got there, I found out Great Zimbabwe was divided into 3 parts. So there was the part up on the hill that was obviously called the Hill Complex. And that actually is where the king was thought to have lived. And that's the part that had the really narrow passageways that you could only enter one at a time. Then there was a place that was surrounded by a wall, like a circular wall. That part is called the Great Enclosure. And this is where the wives of the king lived. So everything else was called the Valley Ruins, and that's where everybody else lived.
And what about the conical tower?
So the conical tower is located in the Valley Ruins. Its purpose actually is not clear. And back in the day, European explorers, gold diggers,
invaders, or thieves.
So they they were looking for treasure. They partly destroyed the tower because they thought that it was hollow and there was, treasure or gold inside. So that's how we know that actually the conical tower is completely solid. There's nothing inside.
Gold diggers, sorry. Hold on, Dr. Quinta. Talking about gold diggers, I'm a bit worried. I just saw some people over there behaving a bit strangely. Do you mind if we go check if they're digging anything? And as for you, dear listeners, we hope you stay with us for the second part of this conversation. Let's go, Dr. Quinta. I'm hoping right now that you found time in Brazil to master these ancestral African slave defense techniques called capoeira, right? That might come handy here.
Oh my God.